My wealthy uncle found out I was living in my car, working 2 jobs just to pay for college. Meanwhile, my old bedroom had been turned into a home gym, and my inheritance was being used to keep my stepmother's business afloat. My name is Samantha, and at 27, I never imagined I'd be a college student sleeping in my car. For 3 months, I worked 2 jobs, hiding my secret from everyone. The trust fund my father left for my education mysteriously vanished, all while my stepmother and her kids were living a very comfortable life. Then, one day my successful uncle, Walter, saw me. I was exhausted and skinny, working a shift at a coffee shop. His discovery changed everything. Before I tell you how my life changed overnight, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever had to start over with nothing but your own determination, hit that like and subscribe button. I grew up in a quiet suburb of Boston. My early childhood memories are filled with warmth, laughter, and a sense of security. My dad, David, had a successful construction supply company that he built from scratch. He was a hard worker but always made time for us. Every Sunday was our special day together. We'd make pancakes in the morning, go to the local park in the afternoon, and watch movies together in the evening. Those simple traditions meant the world to me. My mom, Catherine, was the heart of our home. She had this incredible way of making everyone feel special. She volunteered at my school, knew all my friends by name, and never missed any of my school performances. Her chocolate chip cookies were legendary in our neighborhood, and her house was always a gathering place for friends and family. My favorite memories of my mom are of helping her in her beautiful garden. She would tell me that watching things grow taught patience and appreciation for life. We lived in a comfortable 4-bedroom house, nothing extravagant, but we never went without. My room was painted lavender, my favorite color, and my dad even built me a window seat where I'd read for hours every birthday. My parents would decorate the house while I slept, so I'd wake up to streamers and balloons. These little gestures showed how much they cared. My dad had an older brother, Walter, who was very successful in real estate development. Uncle Walter lived in a mansion on the other side of town and traveled frequently. Despite their different lifestyles, my dad and Uncle Walter were close. They met for lunch every Thursday, a tradition they kept for years. Uncle Walter never had kids of his own, so he spoiled me as his only niece. For my 10th birthday, he took our whole family to Disney World, a trip I still treasure. Family holidays were always special. We'd have Thanksgiving at our house and Christmas at Uncle Walter's. My mom would cook for days before Thanksgiving, filling the house with incredible smells. Uncle Walter's Christmas parties were elegant affairs in his beautiful home, with a tree that reached the ceiling and gifts for everyone. Those gatherings made me feel like I was part of something bigger, a family with history and traditions. What I didn't know then was that my dad was carefully planning for my future. When I was born, he set up a trust fund for my education. Every month he would add to it, sometimes sacrificing his own comforts to make sure the fund grew. It was substantial enough to cover an undergraduate degree and even graduate school if I wanted. Dad was determined that I would have opportunities he never had. He often told me, "Education is the one thing nobody can ever take away from you, Sammy." He dreamed of seeing me graduate from college, the first in our family to do so. Everything changed when I was 12. My mom started having headaches that wouldn't go away. After weeks of concerning symptoms, the diagnosis came in: an aggressive, inoperable brain tumor. The doctors gave her 6 months. She fought for 8. Those 8 months transformed our happy home into a place of whispered conversations, medication schedules, and visiting nurses. The medical bills mounted quickly, even with insurance. Dad started working longer hours to cover the expenses, while still trying to be there for my mom and me. I would overhear him on the phone at night, negotiating with insurance companies, or talking about payment plans with the hospital. Even though he tried to shield me from the financial stress, I could see the worry lines deepening on his face. I grew up fast during that time. While other 12-year-olds were having sleepovers and going to the mall, I was learning how to check my mom's medication, help her to the bathroom, and be strong when she couldn't be. Dad taught me how to cook simple meals, do laundry, and keep the house running. We became a team, united in our love for my mom and our determination to make her comfortable. My mom died in the spring, just as the garden she loved was beginning to bloom. The day of her funeral was so beautiful, with clear blue skies and flowering trees. It felt wrong that the world could look so lovely when our hearts were shattered. Uncle Walter stood beside us at the cemetery, his hand on my dad's shoulder. Both brothers looked older than they had just months before. The months that followed my mom's death were a blur of grief. My dad threw himself into work, often coming home late, his eyes red from crying in private. I would have dinner waiting for him, a skill I had perfected during my mom's illness. We rarely talked about our loss directly, but sometimes we would. sit together, looking through family photo albums and sharing memories of my mom. Those quiet evenings strengthened our bond, even as we both struggled with our grief. Uncle Walter became more distant during this period. He still came for occasional dinners and remembered my birthday. But the regular Thursday lunches with my dad stopped. I later learned that Walter had disagreed with some of my dad's decisions about my mom's medical care, which created tension between them. My dad never spoke badly of Walter, but their once close relationship had clearly changed despite the grief. My dad and I established a new normal. We kept some of my mom's traditions alive while creating our own. I excelled in school, knowing it would make both my parents proud. My dad continued to add to my education fund, even during the financially strained time after my mom's medical expenses. Life was different and sadder, but we were managing together. 2 years after my mom died, my dad introduced me to Diana. They had met at a business function, and she worked in marketing for one of his clients. Diana was attractive, polished, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. She asked about my school, my friends, and my hobbies with what appeared to be sincere curiosity. After months of seeing my dad lonely and withdrawn, it was nice to see him smiling again. Diana had 2 children from a previous marriage. Brandon was 17, tall and athletic with an interest in business like his mother. Zoe was 15, just a year older than me, artistic and quiet. When we first met for dinner, everyone was on their best behavior. Brandon asked my dad about his business. Zoe complimented me on my necklace, and Diana made sure everyone was included. I remember thinking this might actually work, that we could become a real family. 6 months after they met, my dad and Diana got married in a small ceremony. I was happy for him, but couldn't help feeling that everything was moving very quickly. Still, I wanted to be supportive. Diana and her children moved into our house, and suddenly, our quiet home was busy and full again. Brandon took the guest room, and Zoe moved into the small office that my dad converted into a bedroom for her. The changes were subtle at first. When my dad was around, Diana was warm and inclusive. She would ask about my day, compliment my achievements, and include me in family discussions. But when my dad was at work, there was a noticeable shift in her behavior. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Her questions became more like interrogations, and she began comparing me unfavorably to Zoe. Brandon and Zoe picked up on their mother's cues. They were never overtly mean, just increasingly dismissive. They would make plans without including me, have inside jokes I wasn't a part of, and subtly rearrange our living space to favor their preferences. My opinion on household matters gradually became irrelevant. One day, I came home from school to find that my bedroom had been partially cleared out to make room for Zoe's art supplies. "Your room has the best light," Diana explained with a thin smile. "And you 2 girls should be sharing anyway. It will help you bond," my dad thought. It was a great idea when Diana presented it to him as something she and I had agreed upon. Photos of my mother began disappearing from the common areas of the house when I asked about them. Diana said they had been carefully stored away. "It's not healthy to dwell in the past, sweetie. We need to focus on our new family now." The Christmas ornaments my mom and I had collected mysteriously didn't make it out of storage. That first holiday season, our traditional family recipes were replaced with Diana's, and our usual customs were discarded for new ones. My dad was working longer hours than ever. Diana encouraged this, telling him how impressive his work ethic was and how much she admired his ambition. "You go be the provider, honey. I'll take care of everything at home," and she did, reshaping our home and routines to her liking while my dad was absent. Money became a frequent topic of conversation between them. I would overhear Diana discussing the business, suggesting changes, and mentioning expenses. "The children's activities are so important, but so costly," she would say. Or, "Brandon needs a car for college next year." My dad would agree to whatever she suggested, seemingly grateful for her interest in his business affairs. Meanwhile, my own activities became less of a priority. When I needed money for a school trip, Diana questioned whether it was necessary. "College is expensive, Samantha. We need to be saving, not spending on frivolous things," she said. Despite knowing about my education fund, the distance between my dad and me grew wider. Diana was skilled at creating small conflicts and then positioning herself as a peacemaker. "Samantha is at that difficult age," she would tell my dad when I expressed any disagreement. "All teenagers go through this rebellious phase." She would suggest that my behavior was hurtful to our new family dynamic, making my dad feel torn between us. Despite these challenges, I tried to maintain my relationship with him. I would wake up early on Saturdays to have breakfast with him before everyone else was awake. We would talk about school, his work, and sometimes reminisce about my mom. These moments became increasingly rare as Diana began scheduling family activities that required early preparation, effectively eliminating our private time. I tried to be understanding. My dad seemed happy, or at least content with the new arrangement. He had been so sad for so long after my mom died that I was reluctant to do anything that might disrupt his newfound stability, so I adapted, kept my head down, focused on school, and looked forward to college when I could establish my own space again. The family business began showing signs of trouble about a year after the marriage. My dad started bringing work home, spending evenings at the dining room table surrounded by paperwork, his expression worried. Diana would bring him coffee, massage his shoulders, and assure him that she was there to help. She began accompanying him to business meetings and client dinners, positioning herself as his partner. By the time I was 16, I felt like a guest. In my own home, my bedroom, now shared with Zoe, had been redecorated to her taste. Family meals revolved around Brandon's sports schedule and Zoe's art classes. My achievements at school were acknowledged but quickly overshadowed by updates on Diana's children. It was clear who the real family was, and I was not truly a part of it. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon during my junior year of high school. I was in chemistry class when the school secretary appeared at the door, her face somber. In the office, Principal Martinez told me there had been an accident. My dad had been driving to a client meeting when another driver ran a red light, hitting his car at full speed. He was in critical condition at Boston Memorial Hospital. Diana was already at the hospital when I arrived, Brandon and Zoe beside her. She was speaking with the doctors, her voice composed and authoritative. When she saw me, she merely nodded before turning back to the conversation. The doctor was using words like internal bleeding and minimal brain activity. I stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. They let me see him briefly. My dad was connected to so many machines, his face bruised beyond recognition. I held his hand, still warm but unresponsive, and told him I loved him. I reminded him of our trip to the beach last summer, how we had built a sandcastle together like we used to when I was little. I promised to make him proud. I don't know if he heard me, but I needed to say the words. 3 hours later, he was gone, just like that. My father, my rock, my remaining parent, had left this world. I was 17 years old and completely alone. The hospital waiting room became a blur of faces and voices. Uncle Walter appeared briefly, looking shocked and older than I remembered. He hugged me tightly and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Samantha." But Diana quickly intercepted him, pulling him aside for a private conversation. I didn't see him again until the funeral. The days that followed were surreal. Diana took charge of all the funeral arrangements, rarely consulting me. The service was held at a church my dad had never attended, with a minister who had never met him. Diana selected an expensive casket and elaborate flower arrangements, presenting herself as a devastated widow. During this service, she gave a tearful speech about their brief but passionate marriage, positioning herself and her children prominently as a grieving family. I sat in the front row, numb and disconnected. This didn't feel like a tribute to my father. There was no mention of his love for jazz music, his terrible dad jokes, or his tradition of making heart-shaped pancakes on Valentine's Day. The man being eulogized seemed like a stranger. Uncle Walter attended the funeral but kept his distance from Diana. He approached me after the service, pressing a card into my hand. "Call me when things settle down," he said quietly. "We need to talk." Before I could respond, Diana appeared at my side, steering me towards some distant relatives who wanted to offer condolences. 3 days after the funeral, we met with my dad's lawyer for the reading of the will. I learned that he had updated his will shortly after marrying Diana. The family business had been left to her with the understanding that it would eventually pass to me. The house was also left to Diana, with a provision that I could continue living there until I completed college. Most significantly, the education trust fund remained intact for me, but with Diana named as trustee until my 25th birthday. The lawyer explained that the fund was substantial enough to cover an elite university education, plus graduate school if I chose that path. There was also a separate inheritance that would come to me at 25, providing a solid foundation for my adult life. Diana nodded approvingly throughout the meeting, occasionally squeezing my hand in what might have appeared to be a gesture of support, but her grip was too tight, almost possessive. As we left the lawyer's office, she immediately began talking about managing these assets responsibly during difficult economic times. The change in Diana was immediate and complete once the legal matters were settled. That very evening, she called a family meeting. Brandon and Zoe sat on either side of her on the sofa, a united front. I sat alone in the armchair that had once been my dad's favorite. Now that the formalities are behind us, we need to discuss practical arrangements, Diana began, her voice businesslike. "Samantha, you will be moving to the smaller bedroom upstairs. Brandon needs your room since he'll be commuting to college in the fall, and he needs a space for his workout equipment and study area. When I protested that it was my childhood bedroom filled with memories, Diana's expression hardened. "This house belongs to me now, and I will decide how the space is used. Your father would want what's best for all of us, not just you." That night, Brandon and Zoe helped their mother move my belongings to the converted attic room, a space with sloped ceilings and poor heating. Many of my things mysteriously didn't make the transition, including several keepsakes from my mother, and photos of our original family. Within weeks, all visible traces of my parents' life together had been erased from the house. Family photos were replaced with new ones featuring Diana, her children, and occasionally my father. It was as if my mother had never existed, and my own childhood had been edited out of the family narrative. The dynamic at home grew increasingly hostile. Diana would critique everything, from my appearance to my study habits. "Your father worked himself to death, providing for you," she would say. "The least you could do is show some gratitude and respect for this family." Zoe was less overtly antagonistic, but clearly aligned with her mother and brother, reporting my comings and goings as if I were under surveillance. Diana took control of all my expenses, demanding receipts and justification for everything, from school supplies to clothing. As trustee, I have a fiduciary responsibility, she would remind me. "Your father trusted me to make wise decisions with his money." Basic necessities became luxuries. I had to justify expenses while Brandon received a new car for his college commute, and Zoe attended an expensive summer art program. My final year of high school became an exercise in endurance. I spent as much time as possible at school, joining clubs and study groups to avoid going home. I found part-time work at a local bookstore, saving every dollar in a private account Diana didn't know about. I focused intensely on my studies, knowing that a scholarship would give me more independence from Diana's financial control. The emotional abuse was constant but subtle enough that outsiders might not notice. Diana never hit me, but her words cut deeper than any physical blow could have. She would remind me that I was only in her home because of my father's charity, that I was a burden she had graciously accepted. She would compare me unfavorably to her own children, pointing out my flaws and minimizing my achievements. Through it all, I held on to the knowledge that this was temporary. College would be my escape, a chance to build a life away from Diana and her children. I applied to universities both near and far, hoping for scholarships that would supplement my trust fund and give me some financial independence. Each acceptance letter was a promise of freedom, a light at the end of a very dark tunnel. My acceptance to Northeastern University should have been a moment of pure joy. It was my first choice school, with an excellent program in business management. When the thick envelope arrived, I opened it alone in my room, tears streaming down my face as I read the congratulatory letter. For a moment, I could almost feel my dad's hand on my shoulder, hear his voice saying, "I knew you could do it, Sammy." The reality check came quickly when I shared the news with Diana. She glanced at the letter, her expression unimpressed. "Northeastern is very expensive," she said. "I'm not sure your trust can cover that, especially with the business struggling. Perhaps you should consider community college for the first 2 years." I stood my ground, reminding her that my dad had specifically saved for my education at a good university. The trust fund was more than adequate. Diana reluctantly agreed, but made it clear that every expense would be scrutinized. "As trustee, I need to ensure the money lasts all 4 years," she said. "There will be no extravagances." The battle for each semester's tuition became a grueling ordeal. Diana required extensive documentation and justification for every fee. Basic textbooks were questioned as unnecessary expenses. When I needed a laptop for coursework, she insisted I use the family's old desktop computer instead. Each financial discussion ended with reminders of how generous she was being, how grateful I should be for her careful management of family resources. Despite these challenges, those first 2 years at Northeastern brought a welcome break from life with Diana. I lived in a dorm, sharing a small room with another freshman named Jessica, who became a good friend. The cramped space was a paradise compared to the hostile environment of what had once been my home. I threw myself into my studies, joined student organizations, and began building a life independent of Diana's influence. I limited my visits home to the minimum required, usually just major holidays. Each return was more difficult than the last. Diana would spend the first hour listing all the ways I had disappointed her, followed by detailed reports of how Brandon was excelling in business school and Zoe was flourishing in her art program. My room had been progressively emptied of my possessions, with more of my things relegated to boxes in the garage each time I returned. The summer after my sophomore year, I found an internship that allowed me to stay in Boston rather than return home. Diana was displeased but couldn't argue with the professional experience it would provide. That summer gave me my first taste of true independence, managing my own apartment sublet and budget without Diana's interference. Everything changed during my junior year. Diana called me to her house for what she termed an important financial discussion. Seated at the dining room table with spreadsheets before her, she explained that the family business was in trouble. The economy has hit us hard, she said. Even though I had read that the construction industry was booming, we need to make some difficult decisions about expenses. The difficult decision, it turned out, was a dramatic reduction in my educational funding. Diana claimed the trust had been underperforming and that they needed to reallocate resources. Temporarily, my tuition would be covered, but housing, books, and all living expenses would now be my responsibility. When I asked to see the trust account statements, Diana became defensive. I don't appreciate your lack of trust, Samantha. Your father appointed me as trustee because he knew I would make responsible decisions. If you can't accept that, perhaps you should pay for college entirely on your own. Desperate for answers, I consulted a legal aid office at the university. The student lawyer I spoke with was concerned but explained that challenging a trustee required evidence of mismanagement and legal resources I simply didn't have. Without access to the actual financial records, there was little I could do except try to adapt. I picked up additional work hours at the campus bookstore and found a second job waiting tables. At a nearby restaurant, my grades suffered as I balanced work and studies, but I was determined to complete my degree. I cut every possible expense, eating most meals at work and buying used textbooks. When summer came again, I had no choice but to return to Diana's house temporarily while I looked for affordable housing near campus. What I found shocked me to my core. My bedroom had been completely converted into a home gym centered around an expensive treadmill and weight set. There was no bed, no desk, no sign that I had ever lived there. My remaining possessions had been boxed and moved to the garage, many items damaged by moisture or missing entirely. When I confronted Diana, she seemed surprised by my reaction. "You're hardly ever here," she said dismissively. "It made no sense to keep a room empty when Brandon needs a place to work out. You can sleep on the sofa while you're visiting." That evening, I overheard a conversation between Diana and Brandon in the kitchen. They didn't realize I was within earshot as I sorted through my damp boxes in the garage. "The trust fund has been a lifesaver," Diana was saying. "Without it, we would have lost the business last year." "How much longer can we keep using it?" Brandon asked. "Until she turns 25 or graduates," she said. "The terms are specific, but I've been careful, moving small amounts at a time. By the time she could challenge anything, the money will be fully integrated into the business." "What if she figures it out?" he asked. "She has no proof and no resources to fight us legally," Diana said. "Your father was meticulous about the paperwork. On paper, everything looks legitimate investments that didn't perform as expected." I felt physically ill hearing their conversation. They were systematically stealing my inheritance, the money my dad had carefully saved for my future. The business trouble was likely fabricated, an excuse to use my trust fund for their own benefit. I had been naive, trusting Diana to honor her legal and moral obligations. That night, sleeping on the uncomfortable sofa in what had once been my home, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Diana directly, not yet. I would find a way to support myself completely, document everything I could, and build a case for when I had the resources to fight back. I wouldn't give her any reason to cut me off from what remained of my trust fund. The next morning, I told Diana I had found summer housing back in Boston with friends. It was a lie, but I needed to escape before my anger betrayed me. I packed what little I could salvage from the garage, said a cold goodbye to the family that had never accepted me, and drove back to the city with no real plan except survival. My first night in my car, parked in a Walmart lot on the outskirts of Boston, was a terrifying wake-up call. Every sound made me jump, every passing car a potential threat. I arranged the few possessions I had brought in the back seat and trunk, creating a small sleeping space in the reclined driver's seat. My trusty Honda Civic, a 16th birthday gift from my dad, became my only home. With the fall semester still 2 months away, I needed to find immediate work and establish a routine that would allow me to live undetected. My savings wouldn't last long, especially since I needed to keep up appearances to hide my situation. The next morning, I signed up for a membership at a 24-hour fitness center. For $30 a month, I had access to clean showers, restrooms, and a place to spend time during bad weather. I learned to arrive early, around 5:30 in the morning, when the gym was nearly empty. I could shower, change, and prepare for the day without drawing attention to my situation. Finding safe parking spots became an art form. I rotated between several locations: the Walmart lot, a quiet residential street near the university, and occasionally the parking garage of the mall. I never stayed in one place more than 2 nights in a row to avoid detection. Hospital parking lots were good in emergencies, as they always had activity and security, making them relatively safe for a woman alone. I found a job at a coffee shop near campus that opened at 6 a.m. The early shift suited my new sleeping schedule, and the manager was impressed by my willingness to work when others preferred to sleep in. The tips were decent, and the job came with the perk of free coffee and discounted food. For evenings and weekends, I picked up shifts at a clothing store in the mall. Between the two jobs, I was working nearly 70 hours a week, leaving little time to dwell on my circumstances. Every dollar went into a new bank account that Diana knew nothing about, building a safety net for the coming school year. The physical toll was immense. My back ached constantly from sleeping in the car seat. The summer heat and humidity in Boston made sleep difficult and uncomfortable. I kept the windows cracked for air but worried about security. Rainstorms were the worst, filling the car with moisture that never quite dried. I developed systems for every aspect of my new life. My clothes were organized in space-saving vacuum bags. Stored in the trunk, a small cooler held basic perishables, refreshed daily with ice from the coffee shop. My laptop and important documents stayed with me at all times in a backpack. I did laundry weekly at a laundromat, using the time to study or read. Personal hygiene required creative solutions. Dry shampoo became essential for days when I couldn't get to the gym before work. Baby wipes served for quick cleanups. I kept my appearance meticulously neat. Knowing that looking disheveled might raise questions, I rotated my limited wardrobe carefully, making sure coworkers didn't notice I wore the same few outfits repeatedly. The library became my sanctuary during free hours, air-conditioned, quiet, and free. It provided a place to study, use Wi-Fi, and simply exist in comfort. I would arrive when it opened and often stay until closing. The librarians came to know me as a dedicated student, never suspecting I had nowhere else to go. Finding restrooms was a constant concern. I mapped out every public facility with decent privacy and cleanliness. Coffee shops, bookstores, and certain fast food restaurants became reliable stops. I learned which places were lenient about non-customers using their facilities. Meals were planned for maximum economy. The coffee shop provided breakfast, often leftovers that would otherwise be discarded. Lunch was usually something that didn't require refrigeration, like peanut butter sandwiches. For dinner, I would buy ready-made salads or sandwiches at the grocery store, eating in my car or at a park bench. As the summer progressed, I became proficient at this nomadic existence. But the loneliness was crushing. I spoke to people all day at my jobs but could never share my true situation. The few friends I had from college were away for the summer, and I avoided their calls and messages rather than lie directly about my circumstances. Pride and shame kept me isolated, determined to solve my problems independently. When the fall semester began, I added classes to my already overwhelming schedule. I arranged my work hours around my course load, often rushing from morning classes to afternoon shifts, then studying late into the night in empty campus buildings before returning to my car to sleep. My professors noticed the change in me. My work, once exemplary, was now merely adequate. I looked perpetually tired, and my participation in class discussions had diminished. One particularly observant marketing professor, Dr. Patel, asked me to stay after class one day. "Samantha, is everything all right?" she asked. "Your last paper wasn't up to your usual standard, and you seem exhausted." I manufactured a story about working extra hours to save for graduate school, thanking her for her concern but assuring her I was managing. Dr. Patel didn't seem convinced but didn't press further. She did, however, extend the deadline for my next assignment, a small kindness that brought me to tears once I was alone. As autumn turned colder, new challenges emerged. My car's heater worked, but running it all night would waste precious gas. I invested in a high-quality sleeping bag and layered my clothing at night. On the coldest nights, I sometimes splurged on a cheap motel room, justifying the expenses necessary for my health and ability to continue working and studying. I became an expert at using campus resources. The student center had microwaves where I could heat meals. The recreation building had lockers where I could store some belongings. I used the computer labs for assignments. I took advantage of every free event that offered food, often wrapping extra portions to save for later. Through it all, I maintained my appearance of normalcy. To my classmates and coworkers, I was just another hardworking student, perhaps more dedicated than most. No one suspected that after my shifts ended, I had no home to return to, no bed of my own, no family supporting my efforts. I had been living this double life for over 3 months when fate intervened in the form of Uncle Walter. I was working the morning shift at the coffee shop, hair neatly pulled back, my uniform crisp, and a smile firmly in place as I took orders. The morning rush had just subsided when a familiar voice ordered a simple black coffee. Looking up, I froze in shock. Uncle Walter stood before me, older and grayer than I remembered, but unmistakable. He seemed equally surprised, staring at me with a furrowed brow. "Samantha, is that you?" I nodded. suddenly conscious of how thin I had become. How exhausted I must look despite my efforts to appear normal. "Hello, Uncle Walter. It's been a while." He stepped aside to let other customers order, waiting until my coworker could cover for me before motioning me to a corner table. My manager, seeing a potential family reunion, waved me off for a brief break. "What are you doing working here?" Walter asked, his tone concerned rather than judgmental. "I thought you would be focused on your studies. Diana mentioned you were doing well at Northeastern." The mention of Diana's name sent a surge of anger through me. "You speak to Diana?" I asked. "Rarely," he said. "A courtesy call about the business occasionally." "We're not close." He studied my face carefully. "Samantha, you look exhausted. Is everything all right?" Perhaps it was the genuine concern in his voice or the accumulated stress of months of pretending. But something in me broke. Tears filled my eyes and I quickly wiped them away, embarrassed. "To be crying at work, I get off at 2, I said quietly. "Could we talk then?" Walter nodded, his expression serious. "I'll come back, we definitely need to talk." Those 4 hours were the longest of my life. When my shift finally ended, I found Walter waiting in his car, a luxury sedan that made my weathered Honda look even more pathetic. He suggested we go somewhere for lunch, and I directed him to a small cafe where I knew the food was reasonably priced, over sandwiches. The whole story poured out of me. The gradual takeover of my home after my dad died, Diana's control of my trust fund, the conversion of my bedroom to a gym, the overheard conversation about using my money to save the business, and my current living situation in my car. Working 2 jobs while trying to maintain my studies. Walter listened without interrupting, his expression darkening with each new detail. When I finally finished, he was silent for a long moment, his hands clasped tightly on the table. "I had no idea," he finally said, his voice tight with anger. "I knew Diana, and I had our differences, but I never imagined she would do this too. You, to David's daughter." He shook his head. "I should have stayed more involved after your father died. This is partly my fault." "You couldn't have known," I said, suddenly feeling lighter having shared my burden. Walter reached across a table and took my hand. "This ends today, Samantha. No niece of mine is going to live in her car while a woman misappropriates her inheritance. Come with me right now." Uncle Walter's reaction was immediate and decisive. After lunch, he insisted on seeing my car, his face growing grimmer as he took in the neatly organized but undeniably makeshift living arrangement. My few possessions were carefully stowed in the trunk and back seat. A small pillow and blanket were arranged on the reclined driver's seat. A cooler held a few perishable food items. "This is unacceptable," he said firmly. "Pack whatever you need for tonight. You are coming to my house immediately." I hesitated, pride and independence warring with desperate need. "I don't want to be a burden." Walter's expression softened. "You are family, Samantha. The only family I have left. You could never be a burden." His voice broke slightly. "Your father would be heartbroken to see you living like this. Please let me help you." That night, I slept in a real bed for the first time in months. Walter's house was as grand as I remembered. He gave me a guest suite with my own bathroom, fresh towels, and even a spare set of pajamas his housekeeper found. The luxury was overwhelming after months of deprivation. Over breakfast the next morning, Walter outlined his plan. "I've already called my attorney. We're meeting him at 10. I want you to tell him exactly what you told me yesterday. Every detail you can remember about Diana's management of your trust." Walter's attorney, Mr. Greenberg, was a sharp-featured man with piercing eyes and a reputation as one of Boston's most formidable litigators. He listened intently as I recounted my story, taking detailed notes and occasionally asking for clarification. "Based on what you've described," he said when I finished, "we have strong grounds to petition for Diana's removal as trustee. The conversion of trust assets for personal or business use is a serious breach of fiduciary duty. The court takes a very dim view of trustees who commingle funds or use them for unauthorized purposes." "What about the things Diana said about investments not performing well?" I asked. Mr. Greenberg smiled thinly. "Financial records don't lie, Miss Roberts. If Diana has been transferring money from your trust to the business, there will be a paper trail. My forensic accountant will find it." The investigation moved quickly. Mr. Greenberg obtained a court order for all records related to my trust fund and the family business. Walter insisted I focus on my studies while they handled the legal aspects, offering me a place in his home for as long as I needed. I reduced my work hours to a manageable level, keeping only the coffee shop job that I actually enjoyed. 2 weeks later, Mr. Greenberg called us in for a meeting. Spread across his desk were financial statements, bank records, and business documents. His expression was grim but satisfied. "We found it," he said without preamble. "Over the past 3 years, Diana has systematically diverted funds from Samantha's trust into the family business. The transfers were disguised as investments, but there was never any formal loan agreement or equity exchange. The business has been operating at a loss for years, and Diana has been using the trust as a personal slush fund. The numbers were staggering. Nearly $200,000 had been diverted from my education trust, leaving less than a quarter of what should have been available. In addition, Diana had been paying herself an excessive trustee fee and using trust assets to cover personal expenses for herself and her children. This goes beyond civil violations, Mr. Greenberg continued. There's enough evidence here for criminal charges of fraud and embezzlement. The question is how you want to proceed. Walter looked at me. This is your decision, Samantha. We can pursue criminal charges, or we can focus on recovering your assets through civil action. Either way, Diana will be removed as trustee immediately. I thought about Diana, Brandon, and Zoe, who had systematically pushed me out of my own home and stolen my inheritance. I thought about sleeping in my car through summer heat and autumn chill. I thought about working until my hands cracked and my feet blistered, all while they lived comfortably on money my father had saved for my future. Both, I said firmly. I want to pursue both criminal and civil action. What they did was wrong, and they should face the consequences. The confrontation happened in Mr. Greenberg's office. Diana arrived with her own attorney, a nervous-looking man who seemed overwhelmed by the situation. She maintained her composure until Mr. Greenberg began methodically presenting the evidence, at which point her facade began to crack. These were legitimate business investments, she insisted. David would have wanted the company preserved for Samantha's future. Then why was there no formal investment agreement? Mr. Greenberg countered. Why were the transfers concealed in the trust accounting? And why were personal expenses for Brandon and Zoe being paid from trust assets? Diana's attorney whispered urgently in her ear, but she brushed him off. I was doing what was best for the family. The business needed capital, and the trust was just sitting there. It wasn't just sitting there, I said, finding my voice. It was my future. It was meant for my education and security, not for saving a failing business or buying Brandon a car. Diana's eyes narrowed. You were always so entitled, Samantha. Always expecting special treatment because you were David's precious daughter. He spoiled you. And look how you repay his memory, attacking the family business he built. Walter, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. The business was failing because of your mismanagement, Diana, not because of Samantha. David built a profitable company that you ran into the ground, and then you stole from his daughter to cover your mistakes. Diana turned to Walter, her expression venomous. You were always jealous of David's success. His family. That's why you swooped in to turn Samantha against me. You couldn't stand to see me carrying on his legacy. My brother and I had our differences, Walter said calmly, but he would be disgusted by what you've done. Using his daughter's inheritance to prop up your failing business while she sleeps in her car. That's not carrying on any legacy David would recognize. The revelation that I had been homeless seemed to briefly pierce Diana's armor for a moment. Genuine shock crossed her face before she composed herself again. If Samantha chose to live in her car rather than accept the reasonable boundaries of our home, that was her decision. The meeting ended with Mr. Greenberg presenting Diana with two options: agree to a settlement that would include her immediate removal as trustee, full restitution of misappropriated funds, and her resignation from the family business, or face both civil and criminal proceedings. Diana's attorney finally managed to make himself heard, pulling his client aside for a private consultation. When they returned, Diana grudgingly agreed to the settlement terms. Though her eyes promised retribution, the legal process took several more weeks. But the results were comprehensive. Diana was removed as trustee, with Walter appointed in her place. The court ordered full restitution of all diverted funds plus interest. Diana was forced to sell her ownership in the family business to pay the judgment, with the company itself placed under professional management until I was ready to make decisions about its future. Despite agreeing to the settlement, Diana still faced criminal charges for fraud. The district attorney, presented with the evidence Mr. Greenberg had gathered, pursued the case independently. Diana eventually accepted a plea deal that included probation, community service, and a permanent mark on her record that would prevent her from serving as a trustee or financial manager in the future. Throughout this process, Walter supported me completely. He insisted I focus on rebuilding my life and completing my education, while he handled the legal and financial details. Your father was always a responsible one, he told me one evening. He would have never let this happen if he had lived. The least I can do is help put things right. As we spent more time together, Walter shared insights about my father that I had never known. They had grown apart after my mother's death, Partly because Walter had disapproved of Diana from the beginning, I saw through her immediately. He admitted. But David was lonely and vulnerable after Catherine died when I tried to warn him. It only created distance between us. It's one of my greatest regrets that I didn't try harder to stay connected to both of you. Walter also revealed that he had been diagnosed with cancer the year before my father died, explaining his withdrawal. I didn't want to burden David with my illness while he was still grieving Catherine. By the time I was in remission, Diana had already established her influence, and I was effectively pushed out. These conversations helped me understand the complex family dynamics that had led to my situation. They also created a new bond between Walter and me, a connection that began to heal some of the loss I had experienced. The restoration of my trust fund and the additional compensation from the settlement meant I could complete my education without financial worry. I moved into a small but comfortable apartment near campus, donated most of the clothes and supplies I had used during my homeless period, and slowly began to feel secure again. The family business, now under professional management, began to recover once freed from Diana's mishandling. The managers Walter hired provided regular reports, educating me about the company my father had built, so that I could eventually decide whether to sell it or take an active role in its operation. As for Diana, Brandon, and Zoe, they moved to another state after the settlement. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they were living in much reduced circumstances. Diana's reputation in the business community tarnished by the legal proceedings. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only relief that they were no longer part of my life. Rebuilding my life after months of homelessness and years of emotional abuse was not an overnight process. Even with financial security restored and a safe place to live, the psychological impacts lingered. I would wake in a panic in my new apartment, momentarily disoriented and expecting to find myself in my car. I hoarded food and kept an emergency bag packed, unable to fully trust that my situation was stable. Uncle Walter recognized these signs of trauma and gently suggested I consider therapy. There's no shame in seeking help, he said. What you went through would leave scars on anyone. With his encouragement, I began seeing Dr. Morales, a therapist specializing in family trauma and displacement. In those sessions, I learned to process the complex grief of losing both parents, the betrayal by my stepfamily, and the fear and shame of my homeless period. Dr. Morales helped me understand that my hypervigilance and anxiety were normal responses to abnormal circumstances, not weaknesses or flaws in my character. You survived an incredibly difficult situation, she reminded me often. The coping mechanisms that helped you then may not serve you now, but they were valuable when you needed them. Now we can work on developing new tools for your current reality. Slowly, with professional guidance and Walter's unwavering support, I began to heal. I established new routines that nurtured rather than depleted me. I reduced my work hours to a reasonable part-time schedule that complemented my studies. I learned to cook nutritious meals in my own kitchen, finding joy in the simple luxury of preparing food in a safe space. My academic performance rebounded as my living situation stabilized. Professors who had noted my decline now commented on my renewed engagement and improved work. Dr. Patel, who had shown me kindness during my hardest period, became a valued mentor, guiding my interest in business ethics toward a potential career path. Walter and I established a new family relationship, different from but equally valuable as the one I had lost. We had dinner together every Sunday, creating our own tradition. He shared stories about my father's youth and their early business ventures. Through his memories, I gained a fuller picture of the man my father had been before grief changed him. The legal resolution with Diana provided not just financial restitution but a form of validation. The courts had recognized the wrong done to me, affirming that I had not imagined or exaggerated the mistreatment. This official acknowledgement helped counteract years of gaslighting and dismissal. As my immediate crisis receded, I began volunteering at a youth shelter, using my experience to help other young people facing housing insecurity. I understood their pride, their shame, their desperate need for normalcy in a way that most volunteers could not. Without revealing the details of my own story, I could offer genuine empathy and practical advice. This volunteer work eventually led to a part-time position coordinating services for college students experiencing homelessness and invisible population. Larger than most people realize, the work was meaningful and healing, allowing me to transform my painful experience into something constructive. My academic focus shifted slightly as my personal experiences informed my professional interests. I added courses in nonprofit management and social entrepreneurship to my business curriculum, envisioning a career that would balance financial success with social impact. My senior thesis examined housing insecurity among college students, drawing attention to a growing problem while proposing practical solutions. Graduation day was a triumph I had once feared might never come. Walter sat proudly in the audience as I crossed the stage to receive my diploma with honors. In that moment, I felt my father's presence strongly. His dream for my education was finally fulfilled despite all obstacles. After graduation, I faced a decision about the family business. With Walter's guidance, I had learned enough about its operations to understand its potential and challenges. Rather than selling it or stepping directly into management, I chose a middle path. I retained ownership but installed an experienced management team, setting clear ethical guidelines and employee-centered policies. I would serve on the board and learn the business gradually while pursuing my own career path. In social enterprise, the trust fund that had been the source of so much conflict was now under Walter's careful stewardship with transparent reporting and joint decision-making. When I turned 25, the remaining inheritance would transfer to my control, a prospect that no longer filled me with anxiety. Walter had taught me financial management skills my father never had the chance to share, preparing me to handle my inheritance responsibly. Throughout this journey of recovery and rebuilding, I learned profound lessons that would shape the rest of my life. I learned that family is defined by love and loyalty, not merely by blood or legal ties. Walter became more family to me than Diana ever was. I learned the value of asking for help, a lesson that didn't come easily to someone who had survived through fierce independence. Accepting Walter's assistance, Dr. Morale's guidance, and my friend's support didn't diminish my strength, it multiplied. I learned about the insidious nature of emotional abuse, how it distorts reality and erodes self-worth so gradually that victims often don't recognize what's happening until the damage is severe. This understanding made me both more compassionate toward others and more protective of my own boundaries. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that resilience is not about weathering hardship alone, but about finding ways to keep moving forward, despite obstacles. Sometimes that means sleeping in your car and showering at a gym. Sometimes it means accepting a spare bedroom and legal help from a long-lost uncle. The strength is not in the specific strategy but in the refusal to surrender to circumstances. Today, 5 years after Walter found me working at that coffee shop, my life bears little resemblance to my darkest days. I have a fulfilling career working with a foundation that addresses youth homelessness. I own a small but beautiful apartment in a city I love. I have meaningful relationships with friends who know my full story and love me anyway. And I have a relationship with Walter that has enriched both our lives immeasurably. The pain of my past hasn't disappeared entirely. I still have moments of grief for my parents, flashes of anger at Diana's betrayal, and occasional nightmares about living in my car. But these emotional echoes no longer control my life or define my identity. They are simply part of a story that shaped me but doesn't limit me. If you are facing your own impossible situation right now, please know that circumstances can change in ways you can't imagine. The person who might help you could be someone you haven't spoken to in years, or someone you haven't yet met. The strength you need might come from resources you don't yet recognize. Have you ever experienced a moment when everything changed because someone noticed your struggle? Or have you been that person for someone else? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what another viewer needs to hear today. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that even the darkest situations can lead to unexpected light. Thank you for listening to my story. Take care. Good luck.